The man walked into the towering glass building with quiet confidence. He wasn't flashy. No designer suit, no expensive watch, just a simple tie and polished shoes that spoke of effort without trying too hard. His name wasn't important right now. What mattered was why he was there. This guy had built something incredible from scratch, a tech company worth billions. But despite his success, he didn't carry himself like someone who thought he owned the world. Instead, there was a calmness about him, like he knew exactly where he stood in life but didn't feel the need to shout it out loud. Today, though, things were different. Today, he wasn't here as a customer or even as an employee. He was here as a potential partner, ready to meet one of the biggest players in the business game. Sterling Enterprises, the company whose headquarters stretched high above the city streets, was known for its power and influence. They were old-school corporate royalty, the kind of place people dreamed of working at or doing business with. He stepped up to the sleek reception desk, which gleamed under the soft glow of overhead lights. A young woman sat behind it, typing, away on her keyboard, barely looking up as he approached. Her name tag read Receptionist, but honestly she looked more like she belonged in some glamorous magazine ad than sitting behind this polished counter. "Hi," he said, his voice, warm but firm. "I'm here to see Mr. Sterling." For a moment she paused mid-tap and glanced at him. Her eyes flicked over his outfit, the plain suit, the lack of flashy accessories, and then back to her screen as if dismissing him entirely. She gave him a tight smile, the kind reserved for telemarketers and door-to-door salespeople. "You must have the wrong place," she replied coolly, not bothering to hide her irritation. "This is Sterling Enterprises. We don't deal with whatever it is you're selling." Her tone hit him like a slap across the face, not because it hurt his pride, but because it felt so familiar. It wasn't the first time someone had judged him based on how he looked instead of listening to what he had to say. Growing up, he'd faced plenty of moments like this, times when people assumed they knew everything about him before he even opened his mouth. But this wasn't childhood anymore. This was real life, and he wasn't here to argue with a receptionist. So instead of snapping back or raising his voice, he simply nodded. There was no point wasting energy on someone who refused to listen. As he stepped aside, pulling out his phone to call Mr. Sterling directly, he couldn't help but let the frustration simmer inside him. Sure, maybe she didn't know who he was. Maybe she was having a bad day. None of that really mattered. What did matter was the fact that within minutes of walking through those shiny doors, he'd been treated like he didn't belong, and while he could brush it off deep down, he knew this wasn't going to end well. For them. Little did anyone in that building know, this unassuming visitor wasn't just another businessman hoping to make a deal. He was someone who understood the value of respect and the cost of losing it. As he waited for Mr. Sterling to pick up the phone, a small smile crossed his lips. Sometimes, lessons needed to be taught the hard way. The elevator doors slid open with a soft ding, and the man stepped out onto the top floor of Sterling Enterprises. The atmosphere here was different, quieter, more polished, like stepping into another world entirely. Gone were the bustling crowds and hurried footsteps. This was the domain of power players where every detail screamed importance. Thick carpets muffled his steps as he made his way down the hall toward Mr. Sterling's office. When he entered, the contrast between this room and the lobby downstairs couldn't have been starker. Sunlight poured in through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating sleek furniture and expensive artwork hanging on the walls. Behind a massive wooden desk sat Mr. Sterling himself, a tall, silver-haired man with an air of authority that matched the grandeur of his surroundings. At first glance, Mr. Sterling looked every bit the part of a corporate titan, but when he saw who had walked in, his expression shifted instantly. His eyes widened slightly and he stood up so quickly that his chair rolled backward. "Sir," he exclaimed, extending a hand across the desk. "I am so sorry about what happened downstairs. Clearly there's been some sort of misunderstanding." His tone was apologetic, almost overly eager, as if trying to smooth over the awkwardness of the situation. The man didn't say anything immediately. Instead, he took a moment to study Mr. Sterling's face, the forced smile, the slight nervousness, in his posture. It was clear the older man hadn't expected him to actually get past the receptionist. "It's fine," he finally said, keeping his voice calm and measured. "These things happen." But deep down it wasn't fine. Not really. He could feel the weight of the encounter lingering in the back of his mind. Being dismissed so casually by someone who didn't even know him felt personal, no matter how much he tried to rationalize it. Still, now wasn't the time to dwell on that. Business came first. As they sat down to talk, the conversation flowed, smoothly enough. Mr. Sterling laid out the details of their proposed partnership, a merger that would combine resources and expertise to create something groundbreaking. On paper, it sounded like a win-win scenario. Both companies would benefit and the industry as a whole might see a shift toward innovation. But while the discussion stayed professional, the man couldn't shake off what had just happened. At one point he decided to test the waters. "By the way," he said casually, leaning back in his chair, "your receptionist seemed unsure about my visit today." Mr. Sterling froze for half a second, caught off guard by the comment. Then he laughed nervously, rubbing the back of his neck. "Oh yes, well..." He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "I'll make sure to address that personally. She must not have been informed properly." The man nodded but didn't push further. There was no need to press the issue right then. After all, actions spoke louder than words, and based on everything he already knew about Sterling Enterprises, he suspected the company's problems went far deeper than one rude receptionist. Before coming here, he'd done his homework. He always did. In fact, his team had spent weeks digging into Sterling's operations, uncovering cracks beneath the surface that most people never noticed. They found evidence of outdated systems struggling to keep up with modern demands, client complaints piling up unnoticed, and internal tensions simmering among employees. For a company that prided itself on being a leader in its field, Sterling Enterprises was surprisingly fragile, and yet none of this surprised him. Big corporations often operated like icebergs. What you saw on the surface rarely reflected the chaos hidden below. What did surprise him, though, was how blind leadership could be to these issues. How many warning signs had been ignored. How many opportunities for growth squandered because no one wanted to admit there was a problem. As the meeting wrapped up, Mr. Sterling thanked him profusely, promising to follow up soon with next steps. The man shook hands and left, his thoughts swirling with possibilities. This wasn't just about teaching someone a lesson anymore. It was bigger than that. On the drive back to his office, he replayed the day's events in his head. The dismissive receptionist, the nervous executive, the glaring weaknesses within Sterling's empire. It all painted a picture he couldn't ignore. If Sterling Enterprises refused to adapt, if they continued treating people poorly and ignoring the changing landscape of their industry, then maybe it was time for someone else to step in and show them the way forward. He glanced at his phone, where messages from his team awaited him. Ideas were already forming in his mind, strategies to expose the cracks in Sterling's foundation, ways to position his own company as the future of the industry. But this wasn't just about competition or revenge. It was about accountability, about showing the world that success wasn't just about money or titles. It was about earning respect and using your power responsibly. By the time he reached his office, the plan was beginning to take shape. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight. But one thing was certain. Sterling Enterprises was about to learn exactly what happens when you underestimate the wrong person. The man sat in his office late that night, the city skyline glowing softly outside his window. His desk was cluttered with papers, notes scribbled hastily during meetings, and a laptop screen filled with data. He leaned back in his chair, letting out a long breath as he replayed the events of the day in his mind. The dismissive receptionist, the nervous executive, the fragile empire, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle waiting to be put together. But this wasn't just about revenge or proving a point. This was about exposing the truth. Companies like Sterling Enterprises weren't just failing their customers, they were failing themselves. And if they refused to see it, then maybe someone needed to show them. He picked up his phone and sent a quick message to his team. "Let's move. Within hours, his office transformed into a war room. Screens lit up with charts, graphs, and lines of code. His team worked tirelessly, fueled by coffee and determination. They had already uncovered enough dirt on Sterling Enterprises to write a book. Weaknesses in their security systems, outdated technology losing ground to competitors, and a growing list of unhappy clients ready to jump ship. Now it was time to turn those weaknesses into opportunities. First, they targeted Sterling's flagship product, a financial management software that had once been revolutionary, but now lagged behind newer, faster tools. Using advanced algorithms, the team created a direct competitor, sleeker, smarter, and more affordable. It wasn't just better, it was designed to dominate. Then came the marketing campaign. Ads popped up everywhere, social media, billboards, even email blasts sent directly to Sterling's biggest clients. The message was simple but powerful. Why settle for old when you can have new? Each ad highlighted the flaws in Sterling's product without naming names, letting the audience connect the dots themselves. But the real blow came next. Using insider knowledge from preliminary negotiations, the man's team identified critical vulnerabilities in Sterling's customer database. It wasn't illegal, they didn't hack anything, but they found cracks in the system that anyone could exploit. Instead of keeping quiet, they shared their findings with industry watchdogs, triggering investigations into Sterling's practices. Almost overnight, Sterling Enterprises became public enemy number one. News outlets picked up the story, running headlines like "Is your data safe?" and "How one company fell behind." Clients started pulling out left and right, citing concerns over security and reliability. Stock prices plummeted, dragging the company's reputation down with it. Back at Sterling HQ, panic set in. Boardroom meetings turned into shouting matches as executives scrambled to figure out what went wrong. Some blamed bad PR, others pointed fingers at outdated tech, but no one could agree on a solution. Meanwhile, employees whispered nervously in hallways, wondering if layoffs were coming next. Through it all, the man watched silently, monitoring every move Sterling made. He didn't need to say a word. The damage was already done. But he knew this was only the beginning. One evening, as he reviewed reports from his team, something caught his eye. A leaked memo from Sterling's leadership revealed plans to cut costs by laying off hundreds of employees. It was a desperate attempt to save face, but it would only make things worse. Morale would tank, talent would leave, and the company's downward spiral would accelerate. For a moment, he felt a pang of guilt. Not everyone at Sterling deserved this. Many employees were hard-working people trying to do their jobs in a flawed system. But then he remembered the receptionist's dismissive tone, Mr. Sterling's hollow promises, and the countless ways the company had failed its customers. If change required shaking things up, so be it. By now, the entire industry was talking about Sterling's downfall and about the mysterious competitor rising to take its place. Analysts debated who was behind the sudden surge in innovation, but no one suspected him. To the outside world, he was still just a humble entrepreneur building his business step by step. Inside, though, he knew better. This wasn't just about taking down a rival company. It was about sending a message. Arrogance has consequences. Ignoring problems doesn't make them go away. And treating people poorly, whether it's a client, an employee, or a visitor, always comes back to bite. As the days passed, Sterling's struggles grew worse. Their stock price hit rock bottom, lawsuits piled up, and key partnerships unraveled. What had once been a powerhouse was now teetering on the edge of collapse. And yet, the man wasn't finished. He knew exactly how to deliver the final blow. But before he did, he wanted to give them one last chance to save themselves, or at least try. After all, destruction without purpose was meaningless. If Sterling Enterprises could learn from its mistakes, maybe there was hope for redemption. So, he drafted a proposal, an acquisition deal. On paper, it looked generous, buying out Sterling's remaining assets at a fraction of their original value. But there were conditions. Every employee involved in mistreating him during his initial visit would be let go immediately. Diversity. Training programs would be mandatory across all departments. Outdated systems would be replaced with cutting-edge technology. It was a lifeline, but also a wake-up call. Take it or leave it. When the offer landed on Sterling's boardroom table, the reaction was predictable. Some executives balked at the terms, calling them unreasonable. Others argued that accepting the deal was the only way to survive. In the end, desperation won out. They signed the papers, sealing their fate. As news of the acquisition spread, reactions were mixed. Some praised the move as a bold step toward progress. Others criticized it as ruthless and calculated. But none of that mattered to him. What mattered was the lesson. Respect isn't given, it's earned. And when you lose sight of that, sometimes the only way to learn is through loss. With Sterling Enterprises officially under his control, the man turned his attention to rebuilding. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready. Because, in the end, this wasn't just about tearing something down, it was about creating something better. And that, he thought with a small smile, was worth every sleepless night. The man stood backstage, adjusting the collar of his suit as he waited for his cue. The conference hall buzzed with energy, filled with tech enthusiasts, industry leaders, and journalists eager to hear from some of the biggest names in innovation. Cameras flashed, microphones were tested, and attendees chatted excitedly about what was coming next. This wasn't just any event. It was one of the most prestigious tech conferences of the year, and today, the man had been invited to deliver a keynote speech. On the surface, it seemed like a routine appearance, another opportunity to share insights about the future of technology. But those who knew him well understood that this moment carried far more weight than anyone realized. When the MC announced his name, the crowd erupted into applause. He stepped onto the stage, calm and composed, with a slight smile playing on his lips. As he approached the podium, the room fell silent, every eye fixed on him. For a brief moment, he took it all in. The sea of faces, the bright lights, the hum of anticipation. Then, without hesitation, he began to speak. "Good morning," he said, his voice steady and clear. "Today, I want to talk about something we often overlook when discussing innovation: accountability." The word hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. Accountability wasn't exactly a trendy topic in the world of tech, where flashy gadgets and groundbreaking apps usually stole the spotlight. But as he spoke, it became clear that this wasn't going to be your typical motivational speech. He started by sharing stories, examples of companies that had risen to greatness only to crumble under the weight of their own arrogance. Companies that ignored feedback, dismissed warnings, and treated people poorly until it was too late. Some businesses refused to adapt, he continued, pacing slowly across the stage. They cling to outdated practices while alienating those they claim to serve. When arrogance blinds you to change, failure becomes inevitable. His words struck a chord with the audience. Heads nodded in agreement, and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Everyone there could think of at least one company guilty of such behavior. Then, almost casually, he dropped the bombshell. "But let's be honest," he said, pausing for effect. "Failure isn't always sudden. Sometimes it creeps up quietly, hidden behind closed doors and polished facades. Take, for example, a certain financial management software, a tool once hailed as revolutionary but now struggling to keep up with competitors. Its flaws aren't technical, they're cultural. A lack of vision, an unwillingness to listen, and a disregard for the very people it serves have led to its decline." Though he never mentioned Sterling Enterprises by name, everyone knew exactly who he was talking about. Social media erupted within seconds. Hashtags like "Bomber Tech Failures" and "Iron Accountability." Matters began trending as attendees live-tweeted his speech. Journalists scrambled to capture quotes, sensing they were witnessing something monumental. Back at Sterling HQ, chaos unfolded in real time. Executives huddled around screens, watching the live stream with growing dread. Employees whispered nervously in break rooms, wondering if their jobs were safe. Even clients who had stuck by the company started questioning their loyalty. On stage, the man pressed on, shifting gears slightly. "But here's the thing," he said, leaning forward as if speaking directly to each person in the audience. Innovation isn't just about creating better products or services. It's about building trust. It's about listening, not judging based on appearances, and valuing people above profits. The room erupted in applause again, louder this time. People rose to their feet, cheering not just for the message but for the man delivering it. To them, he wasn't just a successful entrepreneur. He was a symbol of resilience, someone who had faced adversity and come out stronger. As he wrapped up his speech, he left the audience with a final thought. The future belongs to those who are willing to learn, grow, and adapt. Those who refuse will find themselves left behind. And remember this: respect is earned, not given. Treat others poorly, and sooner or later, it comes back to haunt you. When he finished, the standing ovation lasted several minutes. Reporters rushed toward him as soon as he stepped off stage, firing questions about everything from his latest projects to the thinly veiled critique of Sterling Enterprises. He handled them with grace, offering vague but thoughtful answers that kept speculation alive. Meanwhile, back at Sterling HQ, the fallout intensified. Employees who had brushed off rumors of trouble now saw the writing on the wall. Clients canceled, contracts en masse, citing concerns over reliability and ethics. Investors pulled out, leaving the company teetering on the brink of collapse. For the man, though, this was only part of the plan. The speech hadn't just exposed Sterling's flaws, it had ignited a movement. People were talking about accountability, transparency, and the importance of treating others with dignity. Conversations that had long been ignored were finally being brought to light. That night, as he sat alone in his hotel room, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The day had gone exactly as he'd hoped, maybe even better. But deep down he knew the hardest part was still ahead. Taking down a flawed system was one thing. Rebuilding it was another challenge entirely. He picked up his phone and scrolled through social media, reading comments from people inspired by his words. Some praised him for calling out injustice. Others admitted they had doubted him initially, but now saw things differently. It was moments like these that reminded him why he did what he did. This wasn't about revenge or ego. It was about creating change, about showing the world that success wasn't measured by wealth or power, but by the impact you made on others' lives. With a satisfied smile, he set the phone down and turned off the lights. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight. But tonight he let himself savor the victory. Because sometimes the loudest statements aren't made with anger or aggression, they're made with truth. And truth, as he had proven once again, has a way of cutting deeper than anything else. The fallout from the keynote speech was like a storm that refused to die down. By the next morning, Sterling Enterprises had become the poster child for corporate failure, not just in tech circles but across mainstream media as well. News anchors dissected every misstep, analysts debated what could have been done differently, and former employees took to social media to share their own stories of frustration and disillusionment. For the man who had orchestrated this quiet revolution, it was both satisfying and sobering. He didn't take pleasure in seeing people lose jobs or livelihoods, but he couldn't ignore the fact that Sterling's downfall was self-inflicted. Their arrogance, their refusal to adapt, and their dismissive treatment of others had set them on a collision course with disaster long before he stepped into the picture. All he'd done was speed things up. Still, the chaos unfolding around Sterling wasn't enough to satisfy him completely. This wasn't about destruction for its own sake. It was about accountability. About making sure lessons were learned, even if they came at a cost. So when the board of Sterling Enterprises reached out, desperate, pleading, practically begging for a lifeline, he listened. But listening didn't mean giving in. Their proposal was simple: buy them out. Take over their remaining assets, absorb what little value was left, and let them fade into obscurity. To anyone else, it would have seemed like an act of mercy, a chance to salvage something from the wreckage. But the man saw it differently. This wasn't charity. It was strategy. He agreed to meet with them one last time, not because he felt sorry for them, but because he wanted to look them in the eye as he delivered his terms. The meeting took place in a neutral location, a bland conference room in a downtown hotel. There were no fancy decorations, no grand gestures, just a long table surrounded by uncomfortable chairs. On one side sat the remnants of Sterling's leadership team, exhausted executives clutching folders stuffed with financial reports, lawyers, scribbling notes furiously, and a few junior staff members sent along to observe and learn. On the other side sat the man, flanked by his trusted advisors. When the session began, the tension was palpable. One of Sterling's senior executives kicked things off, stumbling through a prepared statement about learning from mistakes and moving forward together. It sounded rehearsed, hollow, like words written by someone hoping to avoid blame rather than accept responsibility. The man let them finish without interrupting. Then, leaning forward slightly, he spoke. "I'll make this clear," he said, his voice calm but firm. "What happened to your company wasn't my doing. It was yours. You ignored warnings, alienated customers, and treated people poorly. Now you're paying the price. If I step in, it won't be to save Sterling Enterprises. It'll be to ensure it never happens again." The room went silent. No one dared to argue. His conditions were straightforward but brutal. First, every employee involved in mistreating him during his initial visit, including the receptionist who had dismissed him so rudely, would be terminated immediately. Second, mandatory diversity training programs would be implemented across all departments under his control. Third, outdated systems and practices would be replaced with modern solutions designed to prioritize transparency and inclusion. Some members of Sterling's team visibly winced at these demands, while others exchanged nervous glances. A few tried to negotiate, suggesting compromises or alternatives, but the man held firm. "Take it or leave it," he said simply. "This isn't a negotiation, it's an ultimatum." In the end, desperation outweighed pride. The board signed the papers, sealing the deal. As the ink dried, the weight of what they had agreed to settled heavily on their shoulders. For some, it felt like defeat. For others, it was a harsh but necessary wake-up call. With Sterling officially under his control, the real work began. Over the following weeks, the man rolled up his sleeves and got to work transforming what remained of the once mighty empire. Employees who had survived the purge found themselves facing new challenges and opportunities. Outdated processes were scrapped in favor of innovative approaches. Customer feedback loops were strengthened, ensuring that voices that had been ignored in the past were now heard loud and clear. But perhaps the most significant change came in the form of culture. Under the man's leadership, respect became non-negotiable. Every decision, every policy, every interaction was guided by a simple principle: treat people the way you want to be treated. It wasn't easy. Old habits died hard, and resistance lingered in corners of the organization where fear and resentment festered. But slowly, steadily, progress emerged. Teams started collaborating more effectively. Morale improved as employees realized their contributions mattered, and clients, sensing the shift, began returning in droves. Through it all, the man kept a close eye on the changes, making adjustments where needed and celebrating victories, no matter how small. He knew rebuilding trust wouldn't happen overnight, but he also knew it was worth the effort. One evening, as he walked through the newly renovated offices, he stopped to chat with a young intern. She was bright-eyed and eager, full of ideas about how technology could solve real-world problems. "What made you decide to join us?" he asked casually. She hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "I heard this place used to be terrible," she admitted. "But now, people say it's different, that it's a place where you can actually make a difference." Her words stayed with him long after their conversation ended. They reminded him why he had fought so hard, not just to tear down a flawed system, but to build something better in its place. Because ultimately, success wasn't about winning or losing. It was about creating a legacy, about proving that even in a world filled with arrogance and greed, kindness and accountability could still prevail. And as he looked around at the bustling office, alive with energy and purpose, he allowed himself a rare moment of pride. This wasn't just a company anymore. It was a movement, a testament to the power of change, and it was only the beginning. Months had passed since the man took over what was left of Sterling Enterprises. The once dominant company no longer existed in name, but its remnants had been transformed into something entirely new. What started as a project born out of frustration and accountability had evolved into a mission, a chance to prove that even the most broken systems could be rebuilt with care, vision, and purpose. The offices buzzed with life now, a stark contrast to the tense, chaotic environment he'd walked into during those early days. Gone were the days of employees tiptoeing around egos or hiding behind closed doors. Instead, open spaces encouraged collaboration, and walls were adorned with posters promoting values like respect, innovation, and inclusivity. It wasn't just window dressing, it was culture. Every morning, the man made it a point to arrive early, not to micromanage, but to observe. He liked watching how people interacted, how teams worked together, and how problems were solved without fear of retribution. One day, while grabbing coffee from the break room, he overheard two junior employees discussing ideas for improving customer service. Their enthusiasm was contagious, their passion undeniable. "Hey," he said, stepping closer with a smile. "Mind if I join you?" They looked surprised at first. After all, this was the guy who had single-handedly dismantled Sterling's old guard, but they quickly relaxed. Over steaming cups of coffee, they shared their thoughts, explaining how small changes could make a big impact. By the time he left the room, he'd already sent an email to his leadership team asking them to explore the suggestions further. It wasn't always smooth sailing. There were moments when old habits resurfaced, when resistance bubbled up from corners of the organization still clinging to the past. Some former Sterling executives struggled to adapt to the new way of doing things, complaining about too much hand-holding or wasting time on training. But the man didn't budge. If anything, he doubled down, reminding everyone, through actions more than words, that the only path forward was one built on trust and mutual respect. One afternoon, he received a letter from an unlikely source, the receptionist who had dismissed him months earlier. She hadn't been fired outright after the acquisition. Instead, she'd been reassigned to a lower-level position within the company. At first, she resisted, convinced she was being punished unfairly. But over time, something shifted. In her letter, she apologized, not just for her behavior that day, but for the years she'd spent following orders without questioning whether they were right. She admitted she'd judged him based on appearances, assuming he couldn't possibly belong in a place like Sterling, and she thanked him for giving her a second chance, for teaching her the importance of humility, and for showing her that change was possible, even in someone like her. Reading the letter brought a lump to his throat. It wasn't about vindication or proving a point anymore. This was bigger than him, bigger than any single person. It was about breaking cycles, challenging assumptions, and creating opportunities where none seemed to exist. As the company continued to grow, so did its reputation. Clients praised not just the products and services, but the way they were treated, with dignity and understanding. Competitors began taking notice too, studying the turnaround and wondering how such a dramatic shift had been achieved. Industry, publications hailed the transformation as a case study in resilience and reinvention. But for the man, the true measure of success wasn't found in headlines or profit margins. It was in the stories of people whose lives had changed because of what he'd done. Take, for instance, the young intern who had told him she wanted to make a difference. Within months, she'd risen through the ranks, earning promotions not because of favoritism, but because of her hard work and fresh perspective. Or the mid-level manager who had initially resisted diversity training, but later became one of its strongest advocates, organizing workshops and mentoring colleagues. Each story reinforced his belief that progress wasn't about perfection, it was about effort. About showing up every day and choosing to do better, even when it was hard. Late one evening, as he stood in his office overlooking the city skyline, he reflected on everything that had happened. From the moment he'd walked into Sterling's headquarters to the present day, the journey had been anything but easy. There had been sleepless nights, difficult decisions, and moments of doubt. But there had also been triumphs, small victories that added up to something extraordinary. He thought about the receptionist's apology, the interns' bright eyes, the executives who had finally embraced change. These weren't just isolated incidents. They were proof that accountability mattered, that treating people poorly had consequences, yes, but so did treating them well, and yet, despite everything he'd accomplished, he knew the fight wasn't over. The world was full of companies like Sterling, organizations blinded by arrogance, complacency, or greed. The challenge ahead wasn't just about fixing one broken system, it was about inspiring others to do the same. With that thought in mind, he opened his laptop and began drafting a new proposal. This time, it wasn't about acquisitions or mergers. It was about partnerships, collaborations designed to tackle systemic issues across industries. He envisioned a coalition of businesses committed to transparency, equality, and innovation. A movement rooted in action, not empty promises. When he hit send on the email, he leaned back in his chair and smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight. But tonight, he let himself feel proud of what he'd built, because in the end it wasn't about tearing down empires or punishing those who got it wrong. It was about proving that even the most damaged foundations could support something strong, something lasting, something good. And as he turned off the lights and headed home, he carried that hope with him, the belief that change was possible, no matter where you started. After all, sometimes destruction is necessary to build something. Better the end